The most widely published book in human history reveals that we are created in the image of God. Throughout our human journey, each encounter is an opportunity to see the shared humanity in ourselves and others. Regardless of one's views on religion, each experience and each story weaves us together towards a common path of transformation, a process of growth and understanding, a recognition that, at our core, we share a common destiny. What does the search for truth really mean in our lives? How can we find a sense of unity in a world so diverse and divided? As we reflect on these questions, we start to uncover a fundamental connection that binds us all beyond our differences. Welcome to Created in the Image of God, Building Vibrant Communities, with our host, Wade Franson. Today's episode is Grace in the Grind.
Hey everyone, Wade Franson here. It is episode 225, first day of March, and we're pre-recording, so I'm a prophet. We hope that the show will actually be airing on that day as planned. I have a guest in the studio that I've been talking to as we've been preparing for these shows over the next few months, and she's a Christian author, also a ghostwriter. And she has focused on trauma and healing based on her own life's experience. She's the host of the Faithful on the Clock podcast. We're going to unpack what some of these things are, but she provides a lot of psychological insight to those who want to chart a path of faith in confirmation with God, the Bible, and also the power to backhand the devil. So welcome to the studio, Wanda.
Thank you so much, Wade. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, I'm happy to have you, and I'm looking forward to getting into your life story a little bit here. As the viewers of the show know, we always like to really get to know the true person inside by going back into your creation story. Who were your parents? Where were you born? What were the circumstances and forces that shaped you before you took conscious thought to become who you are today? Tell us a little bit about that little girl, Wanda, growing up.
Sure. So my parents were Ernest and Margaret Hebert. I grew up in Caseville, Michigan. And if you don't know where that is, it's in the tip of the thumb, very rural community, very small town, maybe 1,000 people in the town. So I like to say it's the land of the corn. But so it was very rural. But growing up, because of that, we did not have a lot of resources growing up. And my parents, they really struggled with that. We had to constantly struggling against poverty. So part of my struggle growing up was just, getting basic necessities. I was always worried that we wouldn't have enough money. I would, other kids were doing things out in school, and I was just trying to figure out how I could pay for those things myself, like basic things. So that was pretty difficult, but it was an interesting time growing up there too. So,
what kind of work did your parents do? Obviously, wasn't bringing in a lot of money, but I'm sure they were doing something.
Yeah, so that was a really interesting situation because my parents were quite older when they had me, and so they were actually retired. So, they weren't actually able to work that much, but we did have a small farm. We brought in some income from that. Prior to that, my father had been the chief of police in Caseville. My mother had wanted to be a teacher, but when she, married my father, she just became a homemaker. At the time that they got married, that was still very much the thing, for the women to just be in the home. So, we were just trying to make ends meet that way.
And do you have brothers and sisters that were like older mini parents for you then, if you were a child of old age?
Yeah, my family tree is very complicated. My father was actually married previously, and he had 13 children by his first wife.
Oh my goodness. Was there a religion involved in that?
Well, he was brought up Catholic, so that did play a role in that. But then his first wife passed away, and then he happened to meet my mother. There was quite a big age difference between him and my mother, about 25 years. But then they did have me and two other siblings. So we have a full family of 16 children. I am the youngest of all of those.
That is amazing. I'm glad I asked about that. So I want to ask though, given the psychology connection, I remember a few years ago studying into Jung more than Freud, a little bit of Freud, but more about Jung. And it's, Freud, I guess, diagnosed Jung as having money issues, right? He
Mhm.
grew up sort of on the outside of the elite society. Freud came more from money and society, and Jung was always kind of a social climber, married somebody who had money. And he, so when we think about psychology, that comes to mind for me. What do you think the impact, and many studies have been done on this kind of thing, but I'm curious, what do you think the impact was on you personally of growing up sort of poor, especially in an era where people were, people were doing well, incomes were rising, lots of people were becoming billionaires, this whole social justice thing, and what used to be called keeping up with the Joneses
Yeah.
has become something entirely different in society today, where we're constantly seeking for equality and justice. And how do you look at that whole material thing of poverty versus wealth personally?
Well, I will say, just to clarify too, with the area that I grew up in, nobody really had a lot of money. Like that's just kind of the way that the area is. Farming communities, that's really common. So nobody was really rolling in it. So I think, my story there is not necessarily that unique. But in terms of really not having anything, we were one of the poorer people, or communities in that area. And so, when I think about that, for my personal experience, like I said, it was really difficult just to kind of get a sense of stability. It's not like people were going out and doing a ton of things, but it was still this feeling like I didn't have footing, and like I really had to just kind of be working extra hard, even though everybody else was working hard as well, but just like going the extra mile. Like there was just never any real feeling like I could rest at all. Constantly seeking new opportunities to use what I could to basically, as they say, get out of Dodge and make something. So I mean that shaped me pretty hard.
Yeah. I ask also partially because my senior year of high school, I lived in a tent in
Mhm.
Alaska to get through. Now we didn't have an attitude of poverty. This was a choice because my dad wanted to get ahead. So he bought a piece of land and moved us out there and was building a house because he wanted to get out of having to rent. He
Sure.
had also remarried, had a now larger family, and because of circumstances and past whatever, um, hadn't put away a lot of retirement funds. So he's renting a very large house. And to get out from under that burden, he bought a piece of land and built a house
Okay.
to become financially independent. So it wasn't kind of a poverty mentality per se, but it was an attitude of, we're going to do whatever it takes to get ahead and to get on top of things.
Sure.
Is it kind of similar what you're describing, or?
Yeah, yeah. I want I don't know if any of your listeners out there are Star Wars fans, but I have this mantra that I have picked up from that. You might have heard of it. Do or do not, there is no try. And the reason why I bring that up all the time, it's not that, I think I can't make mistakes or anything like that. It's that growing up the way that I did, there really wasn't any alternative. You had to do it. Like there was no, oh, well, maybe, if it doesn't work out, I'll do like, no, like you just had to figure it out. So, that kind of became my operating system, from a very early age. So, I didn't have a whole lot of, help navigating things. I just had to figure it out. If I wanted something, well, I better, look things up. I better earn the money myself, so that's kind of shaped how I work even today. And but I will say it's kind of a double-edged sword, because it kind of, pushes you a little maybe harder than it should. But at the same time, it's given me this pretty hard resilience, because it's pretty amazing what you can do when you think not backing down, if you can't back down, that's not an option. You know what I mean? That you just have to figure it out. Like you persist way longer and you get it done.
Yep. And so then going through all this, then as you were, getting through sort of the high school years and figuring out what you were going to do, what happened then next for you on your journey?
Well, high school, I had always been really interested in music. I was always writing. So I had gotten some scholarships to go to college, which I did for music. But after that, I had met my husband and we started our family pretty quickly right away. And because of that, I really needed some work that I could do from home that was flexible, because when you've got kids, that's just the reality of things. So that kind of reshaped my trajectory from, the musician side of it to really full-time writing. So I kind of set myself up with my business that way, and that's kind of how that all started.
So in terms of musician, tell me a little bit more about that. What instrument or songwriting or what was that about?
Well, I actually double majored. I did vocal performance and oboe performance. On the side of that, I was also going to the composition studio and, having them look at things that I was writing. So I was trying to do it all, and maybe not so intelligently. But I was just interested in so much, and I wanted to take the opportunity while I could, again, scarcity mindset of being poor. You have the opportunity, you take it. So I was there and I just figured I might as well take every advantage that I could while I was on campus.
And where does the faith element come in?
Well, a lot of what I was doing, even when I was back home and at my house, that really got me through some of the more difficult times that I had in that house, because there was a lot of domestic things going on, but the things that I could rely on was the beauty of all the art and all of the writing and all the music. So I really kind of like buried myself in that just to kind of cope. But that it was my coping mechanism, essentially, to just say, as long as there's this, I can be okay. Like, things aren't great, but at least I've got that, it kind of let me escape. So I was learning, about that. I was always practicing, got my mind off things. And I really, I remember, writing and listening to Bach and Brahms. And I'm like, there's definitely, like, as long as there's that, there has to be a God. Like, there's, no matter what's around me, like, it just grounded me to like know that that was there. And so that kind of like, I wasn't being taught about God, but that kind of proved to me that he was just present. And like, I just kind of felt it. And that to me, like, was my education in faith, like just doing those kinds of things.
Well, I have a quote in the intro of my first book, which is from Sir Thomas Beecham, who's a British conductor. And the quote is that the function of music is to release us from the tyranny of conscious thought.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sort of picking up on the divine, the beauty that's inherent in something that powerful that was reaching you in that way. So what about, did you go for religious training or education? Did you get involved in a church or something? How did you then pursue that path of faith?
So to be very honest with you, I kind of ran from it in every way that I possibly could, like, because there was just so much going on in my life that because of all the things that had gone on at home, like, I did not feel secure with God at all. Even though, like, I knew from everything that I was doing that he was present and I was connected to him that way, there was still, I describe it as like there's this glass wall and I'm on one side of the glass wall and he's on the other. I can see everything that's going on, but I can't access him. That's how it felt. And so I didn't know, how to go to church, how to really study. So I didn't go to seminary. I didn't pursue that, even though that was a big part of like my psyche, and my desire to like just be part of something bigger. But it really was difficult for me to find my place in that way. I had to do a lot of seeking around that.
What were some of the things you discovered in that seeking?
That's a good question. Well, one of the things that I had always struggled with is, like I said, like that access, right? But as I'm, kind of reading scripture, I had two pictures that I kind of had to reconcile in my head. I had all the things that were going on around me in my community, in my home. But then I had, scripture and all these stories of like what love was and what God was. And I was being basically taught two different messages. And I'm like, I have to reconcile these. Like, I have to know who God was or who God is. And so I had to dig deep into the scriptures, dig deep into myself and say, what is causing this dissonance here? And it was really just, like I said, being taught two different things about who God was. I was feeling that he was one, reading that he was one, but that's not what I was experiencing. And so that's a very long-winded way of answering to say, he showed me eventually, that I had basically just misconstrued his character because of what I had experienced. And once I kind of let go of that, then I could kind of accept, all the things that Christianity essentially teaches.
I'm getting the picture that it wasn't so much that you were blaming God, like saying, why are you letting these things happen to me? It's more that just ambiently in your environment, you weren't seeing evidence. Is that fair? I'm just trying to get my head around it.
Yeah, I would say that's fair. It's because like I said, a rural community, there just were no resources for what I wanted to do. So it really was this feeling of being trapped and of not having, there were no advocates for what I wanted to do, just for myself in general. Like, I did not feel seen. And when you come up in that experience, I have basically this theory that if again, psychology, that we will transfer one experience to the other with people. So if we have one bad experience with somebody, we say, oh, well, the next person is going to be bad, right? So I this is, when you ask about like what I had been shown, right? I had to learn that I was transferring my experience onto God. That's, I was experiencing all these things. And it's like, you know what? Just because this person treated me this way, or I didn't have this, that doesn't mean that God's going to be that way. And that was kind of like this big, like my mind like was blown, because that was really my epiphany. It's like, oh my gosh, this is what I'm doing.
What comes to mind is the story of Elijah, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, where he was standing on the top of Mount Carmel, calling down fire from heaven to show the people who the true God was. And then, killing 400 prophets of Baal, after that was all over, but then hiding in a cave. And then God appears to him and there's this earthquake and God is not in the earthquake. And then there's a whirlwind and God is not in the whirlwind. And I forget what the third thing was, great, something else different like that. And God was not in that either. And then there's a still small voice asking, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
And the point that I'm making with bringing this story up now is that you would think of all people that Elijah knew who God was, because he's standing on the mountaintop calling to God and having God respond and bring down fire to prove to everybody who God is. But Elijah himself, what comes to mind is how profoundly Elijah himself didn't know God at all. And none of us really know God at all. Whatever idea we have of God in our head, that's not God. That is, in fact, a graven image, a false idol, because that's not God. Whatever we think God is, I mean, I can't even understand my wife. I can't even understand women. How am I going to understand God?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So what I think I know about God, it's just my fantasy, my view, and it's a working hypothesis. We got to have that.
Sure. I refer to it sometimes as, our pea brains cannot comprehend. We try, we really do. And
Right.
And I think especially today, we all think that we have our right concept of who God is and what he represents. And I think, quite frankly, that's why we don't get along, because we're all saying that we represent him. And in reality, nobody really does, because we don't, like you said, we don't really know him. We can't, and that's not our fault. We just, someday, when resurrection comes, we will understand. But right now we have pea brains. That's all we've got.
Yep. Well, that's probably as good a point as any to take a break. When we come back, we're going to dive into what you're doing now, the podcast, Faithful on the Clock, and a lot of other stuff. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of Wanda Thibodeaux. See you shortly.
Most of us don't lose joy all at once. It gets stolen from us slowly in the middle of responsibility, calling, and survival. Wanda Thibodeaux is an author who's lived the spiritual battle. She's a guide for people who are tired of surviving and who are ready to reconnect with joy. Through her Faithful on the Clock podcast, Wanda explores what it means to live out your calling in the real world, where faith meets work, leadership, and emotional exhaustion. Her books, including Grace in the Grind and the upcoming 5-book Unstealing Joy collection, bring together psychology, theology, and trauma-informed insight to help readers reclaim joy that was never meant to be lost. Rather than offering quick fixes or shallow inspiration, Wanda creates space for healing, honest, grounded, and rooted in Scripture. Whether through devotions, essays, or courses, her work invites people to rediscover joy not as a feeling to chase, but as something to recover. Join Thibodeaux in the conversation and in the redemptive work of unstealing joy.
Welcome back to episode 225, March 1st. If God willing and the creek don't rise, because we're pre-recording, on creating the image of God with Wanda Thibodeaux. Right before the break, we were talking about her emerging awareness of God being not the way that other people and other things she had experienced had been. So now bring us more up to date with moving from that place of emerging awareness and acceptance to the point where you're hosting a podcast and where you're working with others to help them use a psychological approach and the Bible to understanding the trauma and the experiences that they've had.
Sure. Well, one thing that I can, kind of relate that might shed a little bit light up on it. I had an experience, when I was struggling with all of this. But my husband and I, we had gone to church. We had taken our kids there, and again, I'm still like grappling with everything that God is and whether or not I could get on the other side of that glass wall that I saw. But for whatever reason in that church, they had decided to pull out Just As I Am. And if those of you listening are not familiar, that was the altar call hymn for Billy Graham for years and years and years. But the idea in that hymn is that he's just going to accept you just as you are. And as I'm listening to that hymn, like I just basically lost it because I had this kind of epiphany then that the reason why I was struggling so much is, like around my family and around my dad and all of those things. Like I was struggling like with my dad thinking, oh, well, if I could just reconcile him. And I had this idea, well, I can't like forgive my dad for all the things that happened, right? I can't, like, why would God forgive him just as he is, right? So all of that like kind of welled up. But then I kind of thought to myself, you know what? It's not about my dad being accepted just as he is. I mean, it is, but it's understanding God just as he is. So like I was focused on the wrong person, and that's why I said like understanding God's character. And then that basically led to this basically uncoupling of my dad's character from God's. So again, that was another epiphany moment for me. But in terms of how that pivoted, that moment was really that moment where I'm like, everything that I thought about God before, I can let go of. Like that's kind of what, like when there was a crack in the glass wall now, right? Where I could start getting past it. So then I'm like really starting to say, okay, well, maybe I can actually like start believing I'm worth something. Maybe I can start believing that I can like share his message. Maybe I can like do some of these things. And at the same time, I was doing a lot of writing for business professionals. And so eventually all of that turned to say, you know what, I can't just write books for thought leadership anymore. I mean, that's okay. It pays the bills. But I have to like use these gifts to bring his messages out there. I want to work with people who are designed, or, and called to build his kingdom. So that fundamentally shifted what I was doing.
That's powerful. Full confession. That's what I believe this show is doing. One of many people who are making a small contribution to building the kingdom, bringing people together, talking about these things, understanding each other. We live in a confusing babel of ideas, right? The Tower of Babel, and everyone speaking a different language, talking past each other from the perspective of their echo chambers and their insistence that they are right. And there's no real unity. Even in the Christian church, for literally millennia, Christians have been condemning each other to hell over their differences. It's shockingly profound when you think about it, and how it has to change, right? It's and theologically, Satan is the accuser of the brethren. That's his job, to bring accusations before God. So, you start getting into that, you're doing the work of the devil.
Yeah.
You're not doing the work of God, which is to forgive and bring people together and to bring about reconciliation. I just drafted a script for a video that we're working on, in which I kind of wrestle with that, because Jesus said, I come not to bring peace, but I come to bring a sword, right? But then in Luke chapter 2, at the beginning, when Jesus is born, the angels sing, or it doesn't say they sing, it says they say. The angelic chorus says, glory to God in the highest, peace on earth and goodwill towards men, right? So yes, his purpose is to bring peace, but he's predicting negatively, prophetically, that that's not going to happen when he says, I come not to bring peace, I come to bring a sword, and a man's enemies will be those of his own households. It's kind of like in the book of Genesis, where God pronounces a curse on Adam and a curse on Eve. It's not that he's pronouncing a curse. It's like, this is now the result. This is the cause and effect, right? He's not saying, I will make sure that you have pain in childbirth. I will make sure that you desire your husband. I will make sure that he rules over you. And Adam, I will make sure that the earth brings forth thorns and thistles. And I will make sure you have a hard row to hoe. No, he's not saying that. He's saying, because of what you've done, this is the result.
Yeah.
It's cause and effect. You've chosen the school of hard knocks. Good luck with that.
Yeah. Well, I am glad that you brought that up, though, because, I remember one conversation in particular with my dad. And basically, it was a heated conversation, but it is one of the few where I actually stood up to him. But in that conversation, I remember one of the things that I said was that respect is not something that is just, you can demand it. That respect is an earned thing. And again, when we talk about like these big moments, that was a big moment in my life too, because at that moment, I was like, you know what? He is an authority figure. He's my dad, and he's also wrong. He's also wrong. You know what I mean? And so like that kind of set me on a different trajectory too, where it's like, I can understand that just because people are, like I said, in positions of authority, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are right. And I know from my own experience, when you stand up for what is right, people aren't necessarily going to like it in your own house. Like they aren't going to like it. It was hard.
Yeah. So I forget how we got off on that tangent, but something to do with the Tower of Babel and all these different opinions, and but it was something that you said that I went off on.
We're that's okay.
But tell me a little bit about your podcast then. How did I'm curious, what is Faithful on the Clock? Where does the name come from? What does it mean? What's the focus?
Yeah, sure. So like I said, it's after I kind of switched into like this faith oriented, that's really what I wanted to do and the way I wanted to work. Having worked with all of these business professionals, the one thing that I noticed is how stressed and unhappy a lot of them were. And the other thing was that so many of them, part of the reason they were unhappy is because, in my opinion, they were chasing the wrong goals. Like they were chasing the money, they were chasing the fame, they were like all of the things of the world. And some of them, don't get me wrong, there were some of them who really wanted to live their faith. And I remember this one call I was on, and fortunately, the call that I was on, we were all believers there. But she just broke down and cried because she's like, I don't feel like I'm making a difference, and I don't feel I can talk about my faith. And I'm like, there's got to be a better way. It should not be this hard to reconcile your faith, which you have to, that's foundational for your value system, and the work that you do. Like those two should align. Like if you're using your spiritual gifts and you're called to do something, your work should reflect God. It should not be in conflict with him. So the whole idea between for Faithful on the Clock is let's bring those together. Let's align your faith and work so that you don't have that dissonance happening all the time. Because I tell people all the time, 8 hours a day, that's how long most of us work, if not more. That's a long time to not be aligned with your value systems and your faith. Like that's tough. And you're not authentic if you're doing that. So I'm like, can you imagine like how, and I think a lot of your listeners can maybe relate to that they can't let their guard down.
I can relate to that.
Yes.
When I resigned from the ministry in 1995 and I went into business, and my second book is called The Hardness of the Heart. And it has to do with a gut-wrenching divorce I went through, but it also has to do with that journey through this world's corporations. I found myself very successful working for Deloitte Consulting as a management consultant with a very high bill rate, advising some of the top corporations of the world. But I was trying to reconcile my faith walk within, and I looked to examples like Joseph in Egypt serving under Pharaoh, Daniel serving under Nebuchadnezzar, and I tried to imagine those were some of the lessons, but it was hard because you saw this stuff going on and all these demands, and yeah.
Well, and that's part of it too. I mean, I understand, from seeing it firsthand, that when you're trying to work in the corporate space. Now, don't get me wrong, not all businesses are like this. Okay, like I don't want to throw everybody under the bus and just say, oh, business is bad. That's not what I'm about.
No, and that's not at all what I'm saying either. So thank you.
Yeah. It's just that I understand that from a practical side, professionals and especially those in the C-suite, they are under enormous pressure from shareholders, from the customers. Like they are always trying to do more with less. Like it's very, very hard. And so even if they want to live their faith, they have all these external voices screaming at them to not do it that way. So it's not even just a matter of like whether they can handle it and like direct things. It's like they've got all of these other pathways and forces on them to say, no, you've got to do it the way of the world. And that's so I guess what I'm trying to say is like, it's not just like one-on-one interpersonal conflict to say, oh, well, I want to do it this way and you want to do it. No, it's like this whole cultural thing that you got to get past. It's hard.
Yeah. And it's beyond culture. It's also infrastructure, right? So if we look at your situation growing up, and we haven't even gotten into, and I don't know if you want to share any of the details of the actual circumstances and trauma, but let's just use the word dysfunctional. Sounds like it was dysfunctional, right? And
that's
you were
more than accurate.
You were the youngest of this whole system of people that had been doing this dysfunction for quite a long time, and your arrival wasn't going to change any of that, right?
Nope.
So now we look at these captains of industry, right? Whoever they may be, even an Elon Musk, right? Or dare I say it, Donald Trump, or any of these people, Bill Gates, whoever you want to pick and choose, we think of them as being almost godlike, right? But they're not. They're just people, and the forces and the circumstances and the global dysfunction that exists, they're not going to change it either. They're not going to change the global dysfunction. They're not going to radically rewire the system of systems. I remember when the economic collapse came in 2009, I was working at Countrywide doing strategic planning, and Angela Mazzillo was the CEO. I don't know if anyone here remembers who that was. I used to ride up and down in the elevator with him, and I did strategic planning for a company. He was on the cover of Time magazine, January 2009, as the #1 cause of the economic meltdown. He was Angelo Mazzillo. I knew him personally. I knew his business model. I was part of the strategic planning team helping that company grow from what was it, 20 to 60,000 employees or whatever it was we were doing. He was ringing the bell on Wall Street. He was just a cog in the wheel, right? But and then President Obama came in and he had to handle this, and I gave him actually an A- for handling this, because people don't know how close the world was to true economic meltdown. The entire supply system of the globe, the supply chain of the globe, all the manufacturing of all goods was about to seize up, like a car driving down the freeway at 120 miles an hour, and suddenly the engine seizes up and comes to a screeching halt in a ditch. The whole world's economy, and you don't just bring out jumper cables to restart that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean,
So-
oh yeah. Yeah.
That's how close we were to this vast system that we built, this system of systems that is today's global economy, on which people's jobs and food and delivery of milk depends. And if the engine seizes up and it all just suddenly stops, and you don't have gas and you don't have food in the stores,
Right.
and everybody loses their job because every business goes bankrupt.
Mhm.
Now, you don't just jumpstart that again.
Yeah.
We were that close to that happening because the entire financial system of the world was in free fall.
Yeah.
And so within that context is what some of these forces of these executives that you're talking about are dealing. And you can have all the faith you want. You can try to do it God's way all you want. You ain't fixing that.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I try to communicate to people all the time is that it's big, don't get me wrong, but again, do or do not, there is no try. And when you are up against things like that, when you have to find the way, you realize that in its own way, things are figure outable, but you have to be willing to tackle it. You can't just back away from it. And I think part of the reason that this kind of stuff continues is because people are not willing to say, I can take this little part of it and deal with this little part. Maybe we can't fix the whole thing right now, but I can do what I can do, and I can tackle it.
Let me address. I agree with you 100%. What I'm getting at is that some of the people in Countrywide, Angelo Mazzillo himself and others, people made choices to go to the right or go to the left.
Sure.
And your personal, Tracy Chapman has this great song. She's the girl that wrote Fast Car. Everybody knows that song, hopefully, because some country singer made it famous again a few years later. But she also does this beautiful rendition of this song. The refrain is, all that you've got is your soul.
Mm-hmm.
All that you've got is your soul. So in those moments, that's what matters. And your decision may be to resign from your job.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right? You can't fix all that. But you have to, what you're addressing, Wanda, is the truth and the integrity that we have to remain true to ourselves.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, some of that too, I think, is realizing that you do have the strength through God to meet the resistance. Like you have the capacity through him to build what he wants you to build. And just being willing to say, well, what is it that you really want me to do? If it's not in this, normal corporate structure that we do, okay, well, then show me the way, like what, but just being willing to even entertain that idea. I think a lot of people, they choose to believe that it's just too big and that they can't even go that way. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. So does this have anything to do with that phrase that's not quite visible behind you on the wall, backhand the devil?
So that is actually, I'm really glad you brought this up. Thank you. So it says, be joyful, backhand the devil. And it is the, basically the marketing for this book that I'm in the progress of writing. But this is oriented around trauma survivors. And the whole idea is that the devil is always wanting to steal our joy. He's always wanting to hurt God. But God is joy. And if we can stay connected to him, right? If we can, because there's spiritual warfare all over the place, but connecting to our joy, that is the battle, because if you lose your connection to joy, you lose your connection to God, like, because joy is his character. You lose your sense of who he is and like what he's got in store. So Satan's biggest lie is that there is no joy, you're not worth it, like the world just stinks, right? And so he tries to steal that all the time, whether it's from trauma or whatever is going on in your life. And if he can disconnect you from that, he disconnects you from God. I truly believe that that is what is going on. So if you fight that and you say, I'm going to fight with everything I am to maintain my joy, you backhand the devil. You say, nope, not today. Right? And you just backhand the devil.
Well, that's, again, a great place to put a pause for a moment. We're going to go to a quick commercial break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about how to do that and where are you growing next. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of Wanda Thibodeaux on Created in the Image of God.
In a world where faith takes root and blossoms, comes a journey of growth like no other. Blooming for Christ, a captivating exploration of spirituality and the remarkable parallels between a plant's journey and our own. Just as a seed must germinate to become a thriving plant, our spiritual timeline begins with a single decision. Through the insightful words of Reverend Barbara Brian, this book takes you on a transformative quest. A journey of growth that echoes the stages of a plant's life. From the tender shoot of a young believer bravely facing the world, to the full bloom of faith experiences shared and cherished. As seeds of faith are sown, new believers are nurtured, and the cycle continues just as God intended. But the journey doesn't end there. As the plant matures, so does the believer, becoming God's chosen harvester in gardens of divine purpose. Reverend Brian's guidance, rooted in scripture and wisdom, gently leads you through the seasons of your spiritual life. Join us on this journey of discovery and renewal, a journey that unveils the beauty of your faith and the transformative power of God's love. Blooming for Christ. Embrace your season of growth and let your faith bloom. Available now.
Well, welcome back. We're coming into the home stretch, and I don't want this to end because I'm learning a lot and I'm really enjoying it. So Wanda was just telling us about, being joyful is backhanding the devil. Unpack that for us one more time, and then we'll get into where you are growing next.
Sure. Well, the basic idea is just that God is a God of joy. And our whole job, our whole purpose is to reflect that joy back to him. But Satan really, really wants to hurt God. And so he's like, well, if I can disconnect you from God's joy, then you can doubt his character. And if you doubt his character, then it's very easy to say there is no God. So the best thing that you can do is fight for your joy, even if it's just, putting your hands on your warm coffee cup and just taking that in, like just anything you can do to stay connected to it. That's a backhand to the devil.
And again, for music fans, there's this great album by Lucinda Williams. This is a few years ago, called Car Wheels on a Gravel Road. She's got a song in there called You Took My Joy and I Want It Back. It's a powerful song that's coming to me right now. So what makes you joyful these days, Wanda? Where are you growing next? What's next on the horizon for you? You mentioned you're writing this book. I'm sure that's a part of it.
Yeah. I would say definitely for me, I am getting a lot. I would say I'm basically going through what I would refer to as a cognitive reckoning. And that is basically just really understanding how my mind works, the gifts that I do have, discovering more of what God wants me to do. And so I describe this kind of like, I've kind of always had this idea that, if you've ever like stood at it outside at night and looked up at the sky and it's just like so expansive, right? Well, for me, when I think about God, it's a lot like that. But then it's like this mandala opens and it starts to spin. And I never could quite get inside of that. It's like, well, that's God. But I'm, again, like other side of the wall, right? but now understanding, like, my brain is constantly spinning, it's constantly making me, and that's okay. Like, that's how he made me. And so now I kind of feel like it's this weird place where I'm like inside God, and it's just more integrated than it was before. So that is like, that fills me with joy. Like that, like, because it's really reorienting my understanding of who he is and how I need to work, because I'm accepting who I am and the gifts that I have and how they might, play into everything else that I'm going to do.
As you do that cognitive restructuring, do you feel like you're getting, this is coming way out of left field,
That's
do you
okay.
think you're getting any closer to, and it's based on a conversation I had earlier today with somebody who's also going to be on the show in the near future, but do you think it somehow relates to Jesus' statement, if you had the faith of a mustard seed, you'd tell this mountain to pick itself up and throw itself into the ocean and it would do it? That sort of cognitive restructuring to begin to get your mind, it's hard to say get your mind around God, but to get your mind off of whatever pea brain version of God you had.
Right. Well, I mean, it's just a really interesting thing, because I think I had more faith than I thought I did. It's, like, in a way, I would say that I knew God as best as I could, given the circumstances that I was in. But I always had this feeling in my gut of what his character was. That's what made me stand up against certain things that I was encountering, right? Because, like, I can't be the way that I see it. So, as I'm thinking about who I am and the things that I need to do, like, I think my faith was always there. I just needed to walk into it. And I just need to say, it is okay to be connected to God. Like, that's where I'm supposed to be. Because I really wasn't sure of that before. I really wasn't sure. Like, I believed in it, but I just felt disconnected from myself.
Yeah,
Like, those things can be true.
Yeah, you weren't worthy, because I've repeatedly said, especially in the last few months, this is really sinking in for me. The whisperings of Satan is just to plant a seed of doubt, right? Not to outright challenge and the result of that was God calling to Adam and Eve and saying, who told you you were naked? Right. And that doesn't mean who let the cat out of the bag that I created you without clothes. Right. That's not what he's asking. Right. He's asking who made it seem like a bad thing that I created you the way I did.
I'm glad you brought that up too, because for me personally, like, and I again, like, I do a lot of psychology work, but learning to do that and just say, where did it come from, is huge for people, especially with people from trauma. Now, sometimes you can't necessarily pinpoint things, but even the willingness to say it came from somewhere and I have to figure that out, just to be able to question even what you are believing, to say maybe there's an alternative. Because then if you're so stuck on it has to be this way, you're not going to question it, right? But if you can at least start to say, maybe that they weren't right. Maybe all this stuff that's floating in my head, maybe it's just this thing I've had on repeat. And I can put another tape and track on that to play. That's where things really start to change.
So I've mentioned my books. I wrote a trilogy, and there's this song by Leonard Cohen called Anthem. And okay, obviously I'm getting more popular references than Bach and Brahms. And what was it, Brahms that you said? No, it was Bach and somebody else.
That's okay. I'm used to that. So.
Yeah, no, it's cool. I mean, I like classical music too, but so his song Anthem has 3 choruses and 3 verses, and the verse 1, 2, and 3 prefaces each book. Verse 1, verse 2, verse 3. But then the chorus is the same, and this is how the chorus goes from Anthem: ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Yeah. Whatever idea you have of what's true and what's right and what's good and what is God, especially in your head, Our heart is a lot more vague, and maybe our heart kind of has it right, maybe.
Yeah.
But whatever we have in our head, it has to crack open for the light to get in, because we have these hermetically sealed belief systems.
Yeah.
That are self-referential, and we've got protective mechanisms that protect what it is that we believe, confirmation bias or whatever version of it, and so, you have to be willing to ask, where did that come from? Where did that belief come from that I have? And it's not the same, where I'm not suggesting throwing out babies with bathwater.
Sure.
But it's very important to let that light seep in to help us change and grow. The seed has to die in the earth for the plant to emerge. And then it goes through all these stages before it becomes recognizable as what it's going to be. And then it has to have blossoms and get pollinated to bear fruit, and all these changes.
Yeah. Well, there was a poem that I wrote a long time ago, and it's basically, you are the thing you are. And that's the idea, when you're talking about the seed, like if you have an acorn, right? Inside that acorn, you always have the potential to be the oak. That's always there. Like that, there's no debating that, right? But the acorn hasn't become the oak yet.
Right.
But you're seeing your potential. And I think that's kind of like how we need to see ourselves sometimes. Like, our potential is there. We are the oak. We just don't know it sometimes. Because I certainly didn't. Right? Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's God that sends the rain and the water and the sun.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're just about out of time. What thoughts do you want to leave the audience with today? And is there any place you want to point them to connect with you or what you're doing?
Well, sure. I have a devotional that you can check out. That's on Amazon. It's called Grace in the Grind. If you want to just connect with me in general, you can go to my LinkedIn page. It's got everywhere else that I am, so start there. And if you want to check out my faith-based writing, that's at faithfulontheclock.com. But as a final thought, I would just say the spiritual warfare is worth it. Like I said, to backhand the devil, fight for that as hard as you can. No matter what lies he's told you to get you to disconnect, you can reconnect. You can uncouple those ideas, those thoughts that people or other, he has put, the devil has put in your head. You can fight that, but it's got to be an intentional choice. Little steps every day. You can fight it.
Awesome. Wanda Thibodeaux, thank you so much for being with us here today. There's one more thing that I have to do. Well, a different version of me, an alternate reality version of me, which is a little recording of me and next week's guest is coming on. It's called The Sneak Peek. So stay tuned for the sneak peek for next week's show. I don't even remember who's coming on next week. But stay tuned for that, and check out Wanda Thibodeaux on Faithful on the Clock. What was it about the grind again? Sorry.
That's my devotional, Grace in the Grind.
Grace in the Grind. And check her out on LinkedIn. That's THIBODEAUX. Wanda Thibodeaux. It's just really been a pleasure having you here. You are a joy, and I've really enjoyed getting to know you and learning about you and your perspective. And everyone listening in, remember, you're created in the image of God, and God loves his creation. We'll see you next week.
Take care.
So what was it like growing up, Derwin?
Yeah, so, well, first of all, I didn't actually go by Derwin until probably age 21 when I was in the National Football League. So my birth certificate, my name is Derwin Lamont Gray, but I grew up as Dewey. And so I grew up on the west side of San Antonio, Texas. One of the things that when you're able to look back with eyes that are now 54, you realize that life is hard and things take place. So when my parents grew up in the 70s and 80s, you didn't talk about mental illness. You didn't talk about substance abuse. Poor areas around the United States were flooded with crack cocaine, heroin. And so, they both struggled with various issues of substance abuse. Both of them went through incredible rounds of trauma, even things that I don't know the full extent of. And so they were babies trying to raise a baby.